News Platform.
Hello, we're here at Galle Literary Festival down in Galle, of course, and we are interviewing one of the famous authors who's here for the festival and is actually conducting several panel discussions, and that is Sharanya Manivannan, who is actually half Sri Lankan, and she now lives in Tamil Nadu, and she has written 7 books, and she's here doing no less than 3 panel discussions. Good morning to you, Sharanya.
Good morning. It's so lovely to be here.
So, Sharanya, tell us about your roots in Sri Lanka.
My maternal family is from Batticaloa, and I grew up in Colombo until I was about 5 years old. So, Sri Lanka and Batticaloa are very close to my heart.
And then you moved to, I think, Malaysia and then to India?
Correct. To Malaysia for a long time and eventually to India, where I've lived since 2007.
Okay, you've written 7 books. That's a lot. A prolific writer. And it's you've written poetry, novels, children's books, and a graphic novel, which incidentally is set in Batticaloa. Could you tell us about that one? That's Mermaids in the Moonlight, isn't it?
So, Mermaids in the Moonlight is actually a children's picture book, and the graphic novel is called Incantations Over Water. They're companion books, and both of them are about the mermaid or singing fish iconography of Batticaloa. When I was a little girl, I was told that a mermaid sings in the Karnadi Lagoon on full moon nights in our hometown. And when I eventually got to go to Batticaloa for the first time, when I was already an adult, I was surprised and intrigued by the mermaid iconography that's all over Batticaloa. And as a writer and a reader, I wanted to know the stories. And what surprised me even more was that I could not find folklore. And I wanted to understand how you could have a mythic figure and have this folkloric void. And so I kept going back to Batticaloa over a few years, looking for these stories, trying to find out, did they ever exist? Were they erased? Were they just unrecorded? And through some of those learnings and through many acts of imagination, I created these 2 books, Mermaids in the Moonlight, which is the children's picture book, and Incantations Over Water, which is a graphic novel for adults. And I'm happy to say that I wrote and illustrated both of these books.
Amazing. And now at GLF, you're doing 3 panel discussions, or you're involved in 3 panel discussions. Could you tell us about all 3 of them?
I'm really excited about my panels here at GLF. I've got one panel today, which is February 6th, on lyricism and multi-genre work. Then I've got 2 panels on Sunday, February 9th. One is about multicultural influences on our work, how we as people with our myriad experiences of life and cultures distill that into writing and art. And another panel, which is quite exciting, about diversity and representation in children's literature, because children deserve to see themselves in books. And we all do, I think.
So, multi-genre work, that's very interesting, because most often you find an author will stick with one particular genre, because that's his or her specialized area. But you are an author who's actually working in different genres. You're working with children's books, you're working with poetry, novels, fiction, and so on. How does that work?
I think it's just about listening to the story itself, because the story will tell you the form that it wants to take. That's always been my experience. And it need not be a story, it could be an image, it could be an experience. And creatively speaking, I feel that each piece of work, whether it's a poem or it's a book, it I know this will sound very mystical, and it kind of is. Um, it talks to you as you create. It tells you what it wants to be, and I just listen to that. And I think listening is probably my most important power as a creative person. Anywhere I go, I'm always listening. I'm always looking.
Right, and let's talk about your second panel discussion, which is multicultural influences. Again, writers who travel widely, who live in different parts of the world, tend to bring in these multicultural elements to their books. Tell us how your background, having lived in so many countries, has helped you to bring these multicultural experiences into your writing.
So, living in multiple countries, um, it can be a mixed bag. It's very subjective. In my case, these migrations were not out of choice. So there are always two components which influence my work. One is a sense of unbelonging, even exile, and the other is a sense of rootedness, connection, home or seeking home. And these two things together impact me on a personal level. And everything that impacts me on a personal level also gets not necessarily distilled, but it affects the writing because it affects how I experience the world, how I see it, how I understand it. And I think that is true for most artists and writers. Yeah.
Excellent. And your third panel discussion is on diversity and representation in children's writing. Now, children's writing is, of course, a highly specialized area of writing. Not everyone can do it, and it is quite rewarding in terms of, fulfillment for yourself to see all these children reading your book and learning from it, because these are the impressions that mold a child. Now, you're talking about diversity and representation. How important are these elements in children's books today?
So, one of the important things to remember about publishing for children is that children don't have the financial agency to pick up whatever books they like. Only what their school libraries or their community libraries or their home libraries provide for them. Those are the only places where they can source books. So it's really important that families, educators, librarians, and anyone who gets to curate these choices thinks about what children are consuming. There is a huge amount of very beautiful, very interesting, very unique and very diverse books out there from all over the world. Where I live in India, there's a thriving children's book industry, and you can see so many stories which are regional, that are representative. Children get to see themselves in those books, and that's really important. When I was a child growing up, this kind of diversity was not available. And in fact, many generations would read the same books when they were children. For instance, these would be Enid Blyton's. But there's so much more out there. There are books that represent and showcase our cultures, whatever they may be, from different parts of the world, and also introduce children to other cultures around the world. And this is really important in order to shape well-rounded human beings who see themselves and see others as well.
Amazing. So, very important aspects in children's literature. Now, you appear to be a very modest person, but you are in fact an award-winning author, aren't you? Could you tell us a little bit about your awards?
Do I have to?
I'm sure that our audience would love to know about this.
Well, I would say that one of the more important awards I received was something known as a Devi Award, which I received in 2024, and it honors women across different fields for their dynamism and innovation. And I was very moved to receive that because it was for my body of work. Specific books have received various nominations and various awards, mostly within India itself.
Excellent, excellent. And you're now working on two more books, if I'm not mistaken. Could you tell us about those projects?
I'm actually working on several more books than that. I love working on different projects simultaneously. And as I said earlier, something will call me. One of those projects will call me and say, hey, I want your attention now. But among the projects that I'm working on, one that I've actually been working on it for the last 20 years, even though I've published 7 other books meanwhile. It's a generational saga which begins in Batticaloa in the earlier part of the 20th century and comes all the way till 2006. It may change. I may change the dates a little bit. I'm still working on it. And it's about many things. It's about longing, it's about exile, it's about trauma, it's about generational trauma. And it's also, like much of my work, it's about silence. Silence and silencing and the ways in which this happens to people. And the ways in which we erase ourselves as well. So I know that sounds very, very vague, but that's about as much as I can tell you right now.
Well, looking forward to reading those books when they come out. We've been speaking to Sharanya Manivannan, who is one of the authors at Galle Literary Festival. Thank you very much for being with us, Sharanya. Okay, and thank you very much for watching. Hello there, we are at the Galle Literary Festival and we are with celebrated author Helen MacDonald. That's Helen MacDonald, not McDonald. No relation to the restaurant chain.
No.
And she is quite a special author because her best-selling book, H is for Hawk, has won so many prizes and is now being made into a movie. Well, for those of us who write books, that's a dream come true to have your book made into a movie. So welcome, Helen.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here. What a delight. What a day. I've been running around just with a big grin on my face.
Right. And here at Galle Literary Festival, you're doing so many panel discussions and other activities. Would you like to tell us about some of them?
Yes, I've already done a couple of panels on, one on, I actually wrote a science fiction book during the pandemic, which is very different from my normal books. So one on dystopias and the ways in which we think about the future. I did a memoir session just now. And then I think tomorrow we have tea and poetry. I also write poetry. There's all these things I do. And then on the last day, very wonderful things happening in the evening. There's a birding walk with Gahan de Silva. We're going up to Malabar Hill and we're going to be looking at birds. So yeah, I'm sort of covering all the bases in this festival.
Amazing, amazing. Now let's talk about your book, H is for Hawk, because it's an extraordinary book. It is dealing with trauma and the recovery from trauma. Could you explain something about it?
Of course. Yes, it's a very odd book. And it's about this thing that happened. My father was a photojournalist and a very beloved man. He was a friend of mine as well as my dad. He was a very good man. And he died very suddenly while taking photographs on a London street. And you know, he was 67 and we didn't expect it and my world kind of blew away. And I decided to deal with my grief that I was going to do something very strange. I was going to train a goshawk. one of the most predatory and sort of powerful of British birds of prey. I'd been a falconer for many years. It had always interested me, but I never wanted to train one of these birds. They had this reputation as being merciless killers and very highly strung. So I basically, in my grief, I kind of walled myself up in my house with this young goshawk, and I tamed her and trained her, and then went out and watched her fly and hunt over the landscape, and became more and more of a kind of feral creature. So it's a book about love and loss and how I kind of got lost in the wild before I returned to a much warmer and softer mode of being. So it's kind of nature book, but also grief memoir, and a bit of literary biography too, because it's also about the writer T.H. White, who wrote The Once and Future King, which is a very sort of renowned story about King Arthur and the knights. So it's lots of things all kind of mushed up in one.
So tell us about dealing with grief by writing, which is unusual. I mean, there are many ways that people deal with grief.
Yes.
And writing a book is so amazing. And did it work? Did it help you? And
it's funny that people often ask this, and it's a really incisive question, but the truth is, it took me 7 years to get enough time and distance from that period of my life to be able to write the book at all. I think some people, when they write about grief, they write in the middle of the grief. And that's a very different kind of writing. But I wrote looking back, and I didn't think that writing the book was what they call grief work. But something very strange happened when I finished the book. I was absolutely exhausted. And I realized that because I had told the story of my father's death and what happened after it, I had been doing, the grief was made anew, and then it was set to rest. And it was a really emotional moment to finish it. And the thing about the book is that it's surprised me in that so many people read it and responded to it, because everyone's been through very dark times and lost their loved ones. So I ended up touring this book and hearing all these stories from people who had terrible things happen to them. And there became this real kind of sense of solidarity and commonality between humans through doing that I'd never really understood before. It was a really fascinating experience, and it made me much softer as a person. Yeah.
well, your book, it was so well received that, let me see, I've just noted down a few things. You won the Samuel Johnson Prize and the Costa Book Award. It was a Sunday Times bestseller.
It was.
And it's been translated into nearly 30 languages. That's remarkable success.
It's remarkable and unexpected. And while it was happening, it was a little while ago now, I didn't really feel how strange and unusual it was. And I think what I did was I sort of thought about the book as a bit like something I had made, like a pot on a wheel, like a potter has made a pot. And I wrote this book, and then I put it on a display shelf, and people liked it. But I didn't feel it was mine. It was the pot they were liking. It was the book they were liking. So when people tell me, oh, you won prizes, I often go, no, the book did. It's a really strange experience.
Well, you were made an honorary fellow at Jesus College in Cambridge.
I know. My mother was like, it was very funny. I love her very much. She said to me, what do you get out of that? And I said, the honor. And she was like, do you get any money? And I'm like, no. But it is a great honor that I got that. Yeah.
It is indeed. And you've done radio and TV documentaries for the BBC?
Yes, I've done some BBC documentaries, and they were really fun. Usually what happens with those is, because writing is a very lonely job. You sit at your keyboard and you drink cups of tea and you weep. And every so often I'm like, I would like to work with a crew, right? I want to go and do something which is about, do a documentary about nature, about something, real, with real people. And then suddenly I'm doing it, and I find myself at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm at a hotel by a motorway in the middle of nowhere, and I'm thinking, why did I say yes to this? But I really love it. It's a way of talking to audiences that don't read. And I've really enjoyed the documentaries I've done. They've been a real pleasure.
Right.
Even though there are those moments in the morning where I'm like, oh, what am I doing?
Now tell us a little bit about the film.
Yes.
What's going on with that?
It's so exciting. So this has been in development hell for about a decade, and I thought it's never going to get made. You know, because many films are like this. Their books get optioned, and then the film never happens. But I'm happy to say that this year, it's being made, and I'm being played by Claire Foy, who was in The Crown, and Brendan Gleeson, the very famous actor, is playing my father. And I went to visit the set, and I saw all these people dressed as me with a hawk, and there was Brendan Gleeson dressed as my dad, and it freaked me out, you know, in a good way. It was like I felt like a ghost looking at myself in the past. But what really struck me about that experience is not only that the set was weirdly like my house, but the actors and the people around them, the whole crew, were treating the story with so much love and care that I got very emotional about that. They really truly love this story, and they're very excited to get it out into the cinema. But it's going to be really weird seeing myself out there. It's going to be very strange.
Well, it's amazing. And when will the movie be out?
It's out this year. I don't know when, but probably later on in the autumn, in the fall this year. So yeah, H is for Hawk.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you very much, Helen MacDonald, for sparing this time to be with us, and all the very best to you.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much.
The People's Platform. In the heart of Anamadua, lives are changing. For years, patients travelled miles for life-saving treatments, but not anymore. Gammatha renovated a building to establish a dialysis unit at the Anamadua Base Hospital and constructed another building to house a medical-grade water purification system. Gammatha, for the people, by the people.
Get me Moira now.
Aquarius.
We will never surrender.
Prefect. Tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. on TV1.
වසන්තයේ මහා මංගල්‍යය සිරස වසන්ත උදානය 2025
ශ්‍රී ලංකා මහවැලි අධිකාරිය හා එක්ව මෙවර ගල්නෑවට
පාපෙදි තරග හා ගම හරහා දෙවීමේ තරග කාන්තා පිරිමි
කොට්ටපොර ගැසීම
කම්බෑදීම
දෑස් පැඳ මුට්ටිය බිඳීම
ලිස්සන ගහ නැගීම
ජනගායනා
සිරස වසන්ත කුමරිය තේරීම ඇතුළු තවත් ජන ක්‍රීඩා රැසක් සමගින්
අප්‍රීල් මස 6 වෙනිදා උදෑසන 7 සිට දවස පුරා ගල්නෑව මහවැලි ක්‍රීඩාංගණයේදී
තරග සඳහා ඔබේ අයදුම් පත්‍රය අදම බහර දෙන්න. ක්‍රීඩා නිලධාරී නේවාසික ව්‍යාපාර කළමනාකරණ කාර්යාලය ශ්‍රී ලංකා මහවැලි අධිකාරිය තමුත්තේගම.
විමසීම් 071 015 0430.
ඔබේ ගමේ නගරේ දේශපාලනයේ හෙට දවස සතිය දිනවල සවස 6:30.
The People's Platform.
Good evening. We are at the Galle Literary Festival, and we are with celebrated international best-selling author Kate Mosse, who is here at GLF, and she is taking on so many different events. And she is also here with her husband, Greg, who's also doing several events. So quite famous at GLF. If the not famous enough around the world. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I have a bit of a sore throat, so, you know.
Oh dear. Well.
Very deep voice.
Okay. Right. So, Kate, tell us about your 2005 novel, Labyrinth. It was such an international bestseller, translated into 38 languages, and became a mini-series on TV as well. Tell us about that novel. I know that's a long time ago, but that's been such a success.
Yes, thank you. Well, it was published in 2005, so this is the 20th anniversary of the book. And for those who haven't read it, it's set in two different time periods. It's set in the 13th century in a place called Carcassonne in the southwest of France, where a crusade has been preached against a group of Christians who live in the southwest of France. So on the one hand, it's a book about religious war, and then the other part is set in the 21st century in 2005, where a young woman called Alice has come in search of her own family history. So it's the strapline on the novel always said 3 books, 2 women, 1 grail. So it's a grail story, but not a Christian grail story. It's a story about the grail being something that links all religions and all nationalities and all people together. And it's set against the backdrop about this devastating religious war that happened in France in that part of the 13th century.
Extraordinary. And how was the plot, the twists of the tale? How was it accepted in so many different countries which have different religions?
Well, that's a brilliant question, because I think that's the point about fiction, that through fiction we stand in other people's shoes, we learn what it's like to be somebody different, we learn about history, but also we learn all sorts of emotions that we might never come across for ourselves. And it was very interesting going all over the world with the novel. So audiences in Japan reacted in one particular way. Audiences in black communities in America reacted in completely different ways from some of the audiences in Norway, say. So I learned one thing, that people, of course, bring their own country's history and their own history and their views to bear. But also the trick with writing historical adventure is to make it universal. You know, you are not a 13th century French woman, but neither am I. You know, we are both people that bring ourselves to reading of a book. And that's the trick when you're writing fiction, is to leave enough white space around the text for the reader to bring his or herself to the book. So it was fascinating, social experiment really, traveling all over the world with the novel.
Now, before you became a writer, you were in publishing, I believe.
Yes.
And did that help you a lot in when you started writing?
It did help me. I mean, yes, I was an editor. I worked and then a publisher. I worked for 10 years, helping other people bring their dreams to life, writing their books and their non-fiction and fiction. And so I knew a lot about how to structure a book, of course, but then I knew that because I studied English at university, I studied literature at university, and also I'm a passionate reader. You can't be a writer unless you're a reader. So it was very helpful in terms of negotiating expectation, you know, because nobody writes a novel thinking that you're going to make a living out of it. Nobody writes a novel thinking you'll support a family on the back of it. All you're doing when you're writing a novel is, this is a story I have to tell, and how can I do it best? Because of being a publisher, I knew that it was hard work, and I had a full-time job, I had a young family. So the novel took me more than 10 years to write.
Interesting indeed. Now, let me ask you, in this present day and age, when we're dealing with social media and bite-sized information pieces, where do you see books and novels and fiction, non-fiction, all of it going? Is it likely to become more popular because of social media, or is there a certain dumbing down of society which doesn't sort of encourage you to sort of sit down and read a book for 2 or 3 days?
I think there is a problem with people's attention spans, yes, that people have got into a habit of kind of what we call in the UK doom scrolling. So just going through that, and they're not really reading anything, they're not really taking anything in. There isn't a level of concentration. But I think you're also right that we are living in unparalleled times of misinformation. We are living in times where the wrong people have power, the people with malign intent, without a sense of decency and justice, are in power in many countries at the moment. Books are the antidote to that. Books breed empathy. Books tell us about other people's lives. They teach us to respect other people, even if they don't look like us, or think like us, or live us in the same place. And books, when they're properly researched, they are true. They are authentic. They give the information that needs to be told, not just an agenda that is being skewed to one way or the other. So I think what we're seeing actually is the people who are reading books are reading more and more books because they want to know the real situation behind something, not the misinformation they're seeing on social media. So as with all things, there are great things about the technological revolution and very challenging ones. But as writers, we are connected through the stories we tell. Human beings have always told stories. And that's what we're doing here in beautiful Galle. One of the reasons I come to literary festivals is to be with other writers from other parts of the world and different cultures, to listen to them and to learn from them. And I think that books will continue to be a very powerful antidote to the forces of, challenging forces, shall we say, that we have around at the moment.
And when you say books are the antidote for misinformation, do you also mean that when you read a book, you would actually take in that knowledge and it would stay in your head rather than just scrolling watching TikTok dance on TikTok
exactly.
or whatever.
Exactly, because some of these things are fun, but they're not serious, are they? And I would say, I write about war and the consequences of war, faith and the consequences of faith. All of my historical adventure fiction is about wars of religion and the terrible things that happen to countries in particular that are at religious civil war with itself. Obviously, I write mostly about France, but the messages resonate everywhere, and I'm very well aware we're here in Sri Lanka. So the thing is about that when people are made anonymous, when they are turned into just statistics, it's very easy to decide that you don't care about that type of person because they have a different faith from you, they don't matter. When you read a novel, you're hearing the story of a person and you start to think of them as a character, someone that you want to do well, someone that you want to survive. And I think that is what fiction does. Fiction often takes over where the news falls silent. And it encourages us to see everybody as an individual human being and not allow big politics, which is never for the benefit of most of us. It's about a few men in power. It's not for the good of all the other men and all the women. So that's why I believe so passionately in fiction, that I think people will never say, I must read a novel about Huguenot refugees. My latest one, The Map of Bones, is that. But will they say, I want to read about a woman who was forced to flee her home, go to the other side of the world and build a new life for herself? They think, that sounds good. So you could tell the same stories, but in a different way.
Right, and when you talk about or write about religious wars, it's a situation today which perhaps we couldn't have imagined, but that this would happen, that religious wars would still be going on in the year 2025, and millions of people are displaced, losing their homes. And it's happening in different parts of the world, and there seems to be. We were, I guess, in the last, the last 20 years of the last century, and then the first 10 years of this one, there was some hope that war would actually be dying down.
Yes,
There were fewer wars, and we saw the statistics, fewer people killed by violence and
Yes.
fewer wars. But now, all of a sudden, it seems to have broken out again.
I think I agree with you. I think it's very disappointing that we don't seem to learn from history. That we know how patterns happen. I write about ancient history and medieval history and modern history. And history is a pendulum. It swings back and it swings forward. Everything that we're seeing, we've seen before, and we see how we get to this point. You know, the thing that's always said about the Second World War and the Nazi genocide is they didn't start with burning people, they started with burning books. So you would feel that we would have learned more, but it comes down to the same thing, that there will always be unscrupulous people for whom the pursuit of power and their own self-interest is more important than the good that could be done for everybody else. Those people have existed all the way through history and they will continue to exist. Our job as people who, I would imagine everybody listening to this and coming to the Galle Festival, we believe in equality of opportunity. We believe in women and men being allowed the same, people of all skin colours being allowed the same opportunities. Some of the people that we see who are leaders today, they don't believe in that. So it's our job to keep saying, everybody matters, you matter, and you don't matter more or less than anybody else. And that is very important to me. So I think we are in challenging times, but it's up to all of us to raise our voices, because we can't change everything, but we can all do something.
Absolutely. Words to ponder over, certainly. Now tell us, you're also the founder, director of the Women's Prize for Fiction and the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, which are, I think you started off in the UK, but they're both global prizes.
They're global prizes, global English language prizes.
Right. So what was your intention when you set up these?
Yes, I mean, the intention was I worked in publishing and there were many of us involved in setting up the prize, there was a shortlist for a major prize which had no women on it at all back in 1991. Now, it actually is okay, because the judges have the right to choose the books that they think most represent the values of the prize. The point was nobody noticed. And of course that often happens with race as well. Nobody notices that it's all white people. But when you spin it on its head, what we know is that if it had been all women or all people of colour, everybody would say, well, that's political. You know, you're just manipulating it. There is still the idea that white men are the only people with any talent, whereas the rest of us, I think, have got something to say about that. So we decided we would set up a prize once we'd done some research and discovered that 60% of novels published in the UK were authored by women, but fewer than 9% of books ever shortlisted for literary prizes were by women. So it wasn't a problem being public, it was a problem about women's work being valued and honoured as literature. So we thought, okay, we will set up a prize that every year ensures that incredible fiction in English written by women from anywhere in the world has a spotlight. And that's all it's about, is putting brilliant books by women into the hands of men and women who'd appreciate them. Now, 30 years on, we're one of the 3 most acknowledged and known literary prizes in the world. And last year we started a non-fiction prize, because there is an issue there that often women are not seen as experts. And even if there are 2 people, 1 woman and 1 man, who have exactly the same knowledge and experience and success, the woman is often not taken as seriously. So there's amazing work. One thing that is very wonderful, being in here at Galle, it's the first time I've been to Sri Lanka. But last year's winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction was the amazing Vivi Ganeshalathan, and she was the first Sri Lankan winner of the prize. And that was for her astonishing novel, Brotherless Night. So I know I'm here as a writer, but if you're going to buy one book, buy that one.
Excellent, excellent. And could you tell us what exactly you're doing? You're doing 4 or 5 events at GLF, Galle Literary Festival.
I'm doing an event about my own writing, about being 30 years as a published author. I'm doing an event about the Women's Prize itself, because as I said, we're celebrating the 30th winner will be announced this year. I'm hosting a cocktail party for many writers and people that we know who have been shortlisted involved in the prize. And then, as you said, I'm very, very lucky that my husband is also a writer. Actually, so is my son. It means that my husband has come with me. We're both doing events. And that's just so lovely to be able to travel somewhere so beautiful together. So we're hosting a literary lunch on Sunday. And then sadly, we go straight back to the UK. We arrived last night. It's a flying visit of 5 days, which is, of course, why I have lost my voice.
Now, what's it like to be in a family of writers? Do you bounce ideas around?
Yeah, we do actually, because we all write in different fields. I write historical adventure and memoir and history. My husband writes detective stories. And my son, his first series of books will start publishing next year. He writes fantasy. So we're not competing with each other. But we absolutely do share our work with one another. And I read my husband's work before anybody else. He reads mine. Both read our sons. My daughter is always teasing us. She works in art and fashion. She's the director of a big charitable foundation supporting artists from less advantaged backgrounds. And she says, everybody's always saying to her, when are you going to write it? She's absolutely not. Never. There's enough writers in this house.
Kate Mosse, thank you very much for joining us here at Galle Literary Festival, and enjoy your stay in Sri Lanka.
Lovely. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you all for tuning in.
The People's Platform.
අනුරාධපුර යුගයට අයත්